continuing with the pivot table we had created in video one, I widened the screen associated with the video, so you will notice the additional fields I was talking about before that were previously off the screen. So as long as you're clicked into the pivot table, you'll notice that the field list will usually by default show, but if for whatever reason it doesn't, you want to go to the pivot table ribbon and you want to make sure that your field list is selected. Also too, the plus minus button does the expand, shows the expand and collapse, or it removes it if you don't like it. And then the field header also removes if you choose to not show it. So moving back to some of the additional things that we see in our pivot table ribbon, once again we have some sort functionality. We have what we call a slicer, which really just allows you to filter the data by creating icons on the actual pivot table itself. That's a little beyond what we're going to cover today. Like I said, if you want to refresh, you can go ahead and refresh your data, and that goes back to the original data itself. So in our worksheet right now, our original data source is going to be called our inventory worksheet. And so if we had gone and maybe made some sort of change or update to the original data, then what you would want to do is go ahead and select refresh all. We would select refresh all if we wanted the data to be updated in each and every single pivot table that we've created so far. So this is the second pivot table that we've created. So if we just hit refresh, it would only update this pivot table. It would not do the one we had previously created. So just be careful and make sure that if you want to refresh all, that you make sure that you hit that button for all of them. Or if the change was only applicable to one pivot table, you would just hit refresh. Also too, if you needed to change the original data source, so notice when I press on the button, the sample selection or the range selection of my table was populated, and this is very similar to how we selected our data in our original before we inserted our pivot table. So let's say, for example, you added a row, or you changed a row, or you wanted to just do a smaller data selection. You could go ahead and edit here. So I could click on this icon and change it, or I could just manually change it right here. So I'm going to just click cancel because we want to keep that as the original. You have options to clear, options to select, options to move. Also too, as we went over in video one, that in this field value, you have the option to go down to value field settings, and allows you to pick your various types. So I can do sum, count, average, min, max, product. Also too, I can show it as a percentage of certain things, column, row total, grand total, what have you. So it gives me many different options. You'll notice that those same options are up top in the pivot table ribbon, where if I go ahead and pull down, I can show fields by sum, count, average, and notice as I select and move from count to, or from sum to count, it automatically updates the values in the pivot table. I can also show it as a percentage if I want to, and these are the options for me. So you can do some sort of ranking from smallest to largest, largest to smallest, and sometimes that's very helpful when you're trying to figure out, which location maybe has the most inventory or the most sales, or maybe even customer salesperson. So it can be very helpful in certain instances. You can calculate differences and so on and so forth. In this next one, you'll notice that it gives us the option to go ahead and to add a calculated field. So a calculated field is equivalent of us inserting a formula into our pivot table. So it would allow us to, take the difference between two values, or to maybe do some additional calculation if we were looking at, quantity times price or something like that to get a feel for a calculated value. We can do that as well. So if you forget to do, because you ideally would do a calculation in your original data file and then pull it into your pivot table. If you forget, you still have the option of entering in a calculation directly into your pivot table itself. Also too, you'll notice that we have this icon for pivot table charts. So very similar to doing regular charts in Excel, it allows us to go ahead and to pick the type of chart we would like. So column, line, pie, bar, area, so on and so forth. And then you can go ahead and select the one in which, that makes sense. And I'm just going to randomly select one and see what it looks like. So let me just go ahead and for going to close that. I'm going to move this over. Notice too, which is a feature of a pivot table chart, is that it gives us options to filter through our data. So like right now, because we are showing in our pivot table, we are showing product class, we are showing product status, and then we are showing some of our order on quantity. You'll notice that those are in gray on your pivot table chart, and that two of them, product class and product stat, have the little arrows, which means I can actually even further filter down into my chart and notice that it will update based off of the values I select. So if I want to look at, say, maybe A and U and do a comparison, I can easily look at that. I can also filter, on just on certain types of product classes if I so choose, which will even more so narrow down your chart. Notice when I'm doing that my pivot table to the left is also updating. So as I'm adding things or deleting things from my chart, it's also editing and filtering on the pivot table itself, so that the chart, the table will coincide with what you see in the actual chart type. So you have options of doing customization if you want to, do certain colors or add in certain variables. You can change the types, obviously switch in the row and column data, change the different formats, move, add different colors if you so choose, and really work through the design elements of it if that's ultimately what you want to see. So obviously you'd have to play with it and find out which one looks best for you given your objective. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to move to going back to lesson number 6 at the bottom of the lesson on page 10. There are some other data sets. There's student data and visitor data. We're going to go to student data really quickly. And what we see here is we have some student records, and the fields that we see are the year, the cases, the peer evaluation, midterm, final, and total. So what we will do is, oh, I'm sorry, there's more. Okay. Okay, so this may make more sense. We have first name, last name, status, gender, term, year. I'm not sure what this means. Okay, it's included as part of the grade, but I'm not sure what that relates to. Peer eval, midterm, final, and total. So let's say we are trying to get a feel for, how male versus female students compare as it relates to, say, grades. Okay, so what we can do is go ahead and select A through L. And because we don't have any dates in this data range, it's fine for us to go ahead and select all of our columns. If we go to Insert, Pivot Table, go ahead and click OK. Now what we're going to do is we are going to look to see the comparison from, say, gender to the total. So what we want to do is we want to put gender in our rows. We want to put the total in our values, but right now it's defaulting to count. So that's telling us how many records are in each of the two different criteria, which means that there's 248 female versus 252 male. That's not really what we want. We want to see the sum of the total, or maybe even an average of the total. Well, let's go sum first and see. So we can really kind of do a comparison to see if there's a major difference between performance for female versus male. But let's say that's not enough for us to answer our question or to get a feel for the data. We want to pull in some additional fields. So we want to, let's say, pull in the status. So now we break it down between female, now we have international US, male, international US, and then showing up as blank, but that's only because, and that's partially because we selected the entire columns, but there's no data that's summarizing in there, so that's fine. You just sort of ignore that. Okay, so if we look at international versus our female, so keep in mind this is a total, so we really don't know exactly what that relates to. So let's go ahead and pull our total in again, but this time we're going to leave it as a count, because keep in mind that if there's 223 US females and only 25 internationals, then obviously our values are going to be very different. So maybe what we want to do is saying, you know what, instead of sum of total, let's go ahead and change that and let's get a feel for a average. Now I don't like the way that formatted, so I can format that a couple different ways. I can go to average of total, I can go back down to value field settings, I can click on the little number format, and I can go ahead and change this to number. Or I can simply just go to the home ribbon, go to the number section, and just select the whole column and format it that way as well. So this allows me to get a better feel for the averages, where there is looks like a slightly difference in average between the international versus US for both male and female. But let's say that's not enough. I want to get a feel for, you know, the term. So maybe there's a big difference between fall versus spring. So once again, if I add in an additional field in my pivot table field list, you'll notice that it's going to the term itself. So, is this, you know, you might, and as you're going through pivot tables, you might start clicking on and entering in fields and then sort of do an evaluation. Does this make sense given what I'm trying to look at? Is this the best way to look at my data? And because of the way in which pivot tables operate, it's easy to sort of move things around and then get a feel for what's best for you in terms of how you want to look at the data. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually move the term over to column because I want to get a feel for and sort of look at it side by side. What's throwing me off here is these blanks, right? So I'm going to go ahead and I wonder if this is, oof, that's not what I wanted to do. Okay. All right, so what we see here is that we have female, we have male, international, US, and then we see that we have the difference between fall versus spring. So if you look at them that way, more side by side, it might give a better indicator in terms of what the overall performance looks like. So it gives you a count of fall versus spring. So there's an increased number of students taking this course in the springtime. And once again, the average is pretty much the same, and then we see the total of the count. So if we're looking at that, we see, okay, we have a higher number of students they're taking in the spring, lower number in the fall. Does that sort of correlate to what I see here related to the grades? The grades look like they're more consistent in the spring, and there seems to be a greater variance in the fall. So although the overall average is higher in spring. So just gives you a different way to look at the data. You can potentially go ahead and start, you know, playing with the data a little bit more and sort of moving things around as well. Let's see, I'm going to go ahead and let's say we go ahead and pull in the year. Once again, as I was adding my fields, they default to go down in my row, and let's say that's not really the best way for me to go ahead and to look at it. So let's say I want to look at it related to year compared to term, and then I want to see gender and status. So you'll notice it's doing, there's a lot of buttons up here right now that it's showing that for 95 there's both spring and fall. So if I collapse, it'll show them together. If I expand, it'll show them side by side. And sometimes people find it really confusing to sort of read the pivot table this way. So what we're going to do here is we're actually going to go and it'll default anytime we have various types of values to do totals. We're going to go ahead and remove this. Ooh, that's not what I wanted to do. All right, so let's figure out a way to reorder our pivot table, because now that we added in year, it's getting a little too busy and it's too hard to read. So what we're going to do, what I'm going to try to do here is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to move the year in the term down into my row. What I'm then going to do is move my gender and my status up top, and I'm going to actually get rid of my count of total. So I just leave it as average of total. So what you'll see now is that it's a little bit easier to read, and that I see female and I see international US, I see male, international US, and then I see a total. So this would allow you to look at it the different years sort of side by side with your fall and your spring, and sort of allow you to evaluate the data set better. it's pivot tables are tricky in that you just need to play with them and put the data in a format that makes sense for you. They're unique and that a different person would format the data differently, and that's okay. It's just whatever is most clear and concise to you and is very obvious when you're looking at it, because usually you're coming at data sets like trying to answer some sort of question associated with it.